Contract signed in December 2000. $4.3 billion. Completion date 2011. Finishing the plant is now estimated to cost somewhere between $17 and $20 billion. And the first useful thing it ever did happened in October 2025, 14 years after the deadline. On the 15th of that month, in the desert of southeastern Washington state, a furnace the size of a small house poured its first load of molten glass. Inside it was radioactive waste that had been sitting in underground tanks since the Cold War. It was the first time that any of it had been turned into glass. Here is the part that makes this a story about money rather than about engineering. For most of those 25 years, the contract worked exactly as written. The costs were reimbursed, the fees were paid, the invoices were approved. What did not happen year after year was the thing the plant was built to do. This is the anatomy of a contract that kept paying for a plant that could not yet run. To understand why the plant exists, you have to understand what is buried at Hanford. From the Manhattan Project until the end of the Cold War, this site made plutonium for American nuclear weapons, more than 67 tons of it. The waste from that process, highly radioactive and chemically aggressive, was pumped into underground tanks. There are 177 of them holding roughly 56 million gallons. 149 of those tanks were built with a single steel shell, the other 28 with two. At least 67 of them are assumed to have leaked. Somewhere around 1 million gallons has reached the soil, and estimates of the exact tank count vary between sources. Not far away runs the Columbia River. That is the whole problem in one sentence. A chemical inventory nobody fully documented, in tanks that are older than the interstate highway system, near a river that supplies a region. There is no version of this where the waste is left alone. Under a court-enforced agreement between the federal government and the state of Washington, the tanks have to be emptied and the waste has to be treated, on deadlines a judge can enforce. The plan was to turn that waste into glass. Glass does not leak, and unlike steel, it does not corrode on a schedule anyone has to manage. The first attempt was not the plant we are talking about. In the late 1990s, the Department of Energy tried privatization. It contracted a subsidiary of British Nuclear Fuels to build and operate a vitrification plant, on the theory that a private operator carried the risk. In April 2000, that contractor raised its own cost estimate from $6.9 billion to $15.2. In May, the Energy Secretary of the time, Bill Richardson, terminated the contract. He is quoted as calling the deal outrageously expensive and inadequate in many ways. That is worth holding on to, because it is the first time in this story that a number more than doubled before a single major structure existed. It would not be the last. The department now needed a new model, quickly, and with a political clock running. What it chose was a model that would define the next quarter century. In December 2000, the department awarded an 11-year contract to Bechtel National, $4.3 billion. Design, build, and commission the waste treatment and immobilization plant. Done by 2011. The contract type is the detail that matters more than any other in this episode. It was a cost-plus incentive fee contract. In plain terms, the government reimburses the contractor for the allowable costs of the work and then pays a fee on top, which rises or falls depending on how the actual costs compare to cost targets and whether performance milestones are met. There is nothing improper about that structure. For a first-of-a-kind nuclear facility, where nobody can price the unknown, a fixed price contract would have been either refused or padded, but it has a property worth stating out loud. If the work takes longer, the reimbursement continues. The base of the arrangement grows with the problem it was meant to solve. The second decision compounded the first. To hit 2011, the department ran the project fast track. Construction began while the design was still being finished. Concrete was poured for the low-activity waste building in June 2002. In June 2004, the Government Accountability Office published a report on the project. Its recommendation was blunt for that kind of document. Do not use an accelerated parallel design and construction approach on complex nuclear facilities. The reasoning was not theoretical. When you build before you know, Every design change becomes a demolition order. Steel that is already in place has to be cut out. Concrete that is already cured has to be reanalyzed. The cost of learning something late is not the cost of the knowledge. It is the cost of everything you built while you did not have it. The department did not abandon the approach. Construction continued. And the reason it continued is worth naming because it is the same reason in almost every project of this kind. The schedule was not really an engineering estimate. It was a commitment made to a state government, to a regulator, and to a Congress that funded the site year by year, and a commitment of that sort is easier to keep on paper by starting early than to revise in public by admitting the design is not ready. Then the ground itself changed. Starting in 2002, the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, the independent oversight body for these sites, questioned whether the seismic design basis was strong enough. A new analysis in 2005 confirmed that the criteria used for the two largest buildings, the pre-treatment facility and the high-level waste facility, were not sufficiently conservative. By one technical paper, the seismic design basis rose by up to about 40%. In December 2004, the department slowed construction on those buildings, and a large re-engineering effort followed. It is important to be fair about what this was. This was not a contractor failing. This was a regulator correcting an assumption about earthquakes on a building that would hold liquid high-level nuclear waste, and the correction arrived after part of it was already standing. In April 2006, the Accountability Office reported the result. The estimate had risen by more than 150% since 2000, to around $11 billion plus fee, and completion had moved from 2011 to 2017 or later. A new baseline was approved in December 2006. By July 2007, the estimate was over $12.2 billion, with completion at the end of 2019. And in the same report, the Accountability Office described something that has nothing to do with earthquakes or chemistry. The department was receiving invoices from the contractor of between $40 and $60 million a month. In fiscal years 2005 and 2006, it did little or no review of those invoices itself, relying instead on the Defense Contract Audit Agency and on the contractor's own systems. It had agreed to a contract clause that left it 7 days to review an invoice, rather than the 30 days that is standard. Its controls over project-funded property were weak enough that missing assets were sometimes reported 2 years late. 11 recommendations followed. The department considered its controls adequate. The Accountability Office disagreed. That is the quiet center of this story, not a theft. A payment process running at full speed while the thing being paid for stood still. The technical problems underneath were real, and they were not solved. The waste in the tanks is a slurry of solids and liquids that has to be kept mixed. And the plant was designed to mix it without moving parts, using pulse jet mixers, because anything mechanical inside a hot cell cannot be repaired. The question was whether that mixing would actually work at scale, and whether pockets of settled solids could generate flammable hydrogen inside tanks, vessels, and piping. And underneath that question sat a harder one, which the Accountability Office listed as one of the 4 core technical problems. Nobody knew precisely what was in the tanks. Decades of mixed chemical and radioactive waste, poorly documented, is not a feedstock you can design a machine around with confidence. In December 2010, the Safety Board issued a formal recommendation demanding large-scale testing of the mixing technology before the design could be trusted. 6 months earlier, in July 2010, a senior research and technology manager on the project named Walter Tamosaitis had been removed from his role after raising concerns about exactly that issue. In June 2011, the board issued a second recommendation on safety culture, finding that the behavior of both department and contractor management reinforced a subculture that discouraged the timely raising of technical safety concerns. Not a conspiracy, an organization that had made it expensive to be the person with the bad news. In January 2012, the department's own health and safety office reported that parts of the design might violate departmental safety standards. Work was suspended on several major systems, including the pre-treatment facility and parts of the high-level waste facility. By the end of that year, the Accountability Office put the estimate at $13.4 billion as of May 2012, with the schedule slipped by nearly a decade. Two numbers from that report define the whole project. Construction was more than 55% complete. Design was about 80% complete. The industry norm before construction starts is 90%. And the report found cases where the department had rewarded the contractor early for resolving technical problems that were later found not to be resolved. It recommended identifying and recovering incorrect incentive payments. The department reviewed milestone payments back to January 2009 and concluded all of them were correct. Again, the fair version, stopping work on those two buildings was a safety decision. And it was the right one. Concrete does not forgive an unresolved hydrogen question, but a stopped building is not a free building. By 2020, the Accountability Office reported that of more than $11 billion spent on the plant up to that point, $3.8 billion had gone into the pretreatment facility, the building that had been halted in 2012. Keeping that unfinished structure maintained had cost another $752 million through fiscal year 2018, and about $400 million more had been spent studying what to do instead. That is roughly $5 billion attached to a building that has never processed anything, and the office's finding was that the department still had no clear strategy for it. Then the paperwork produced its own record. In February 2012, 3 people connected to the project, an engineering manager from the department and 2 managers working for the contractor, filed a sealed whistleblower suit under the False Claims Act. In November 2016, it settled for $125 million. The allegations covered more than 12 years of work and claimed knowingly false claims for payment involving deficient nuclear quality, and separately that federal money had been used for a lobbying campaign aimed at Congress, including downplaying the safety board's concerns to members of Congress, and an attempt to secure an additional $50 million in public funds. Those allegations were resolved without any admission. The companies denied wrongdoing and there was no judgment. The second settlement is different, and the difference is the entire reason it belongs in this episode. On the 22nd of September 2020, Bechtel and AECOM agreed to pay $57.75 million, and this time with a formal statement of facts. They admitted that between 2009 and 2019 they had charged the government for idle time that workers had not worked, that management knew, and that the billing continued for years even after they knew they were under investigation. 10 years of invoices for hours that did not happen, on a plant that had not yet treated a single gallon. And then slowly the engineering caught up. In the mid-2010s, the department changed strategy. Instead of waiting for the pretreatment facility that had been stopped, it routed the low-activity portion of the waste around it, removing the cesium separately in a system that started operating in early 2022. The first melter was heated up in 2023. Cold testing with simulated waste ran in 2025. In October 2025, the state regulator issued the operating permit, and on the 15th, vitrification began, on time against the court-enforced deadline with the state of Washington, a deadline that had itself been moved from the 1st of August that year. By December, more than 20 stainless steel containers of glass had been produced. By the 26th of May 2026, more than 100,000 gallons of tank waste had been turned into glass. That is real, and it should be said as plainly as the failures. It should also be said with its limits attached. This is the low activity stream only. The high level fraction is not scheduled for vitrification until 2033. The pretreatment facility remains unresolved. And the plant is the small number here. The whole tank waste mission has been estimated at around $341 billion, running to about 2084. So what actually failed? Not the physics in the end. The glass exists, not the workforce, and not, in any simple way, the contractor. The Accountability Office directed its recommendations at the department, which chose the fast-track approach and defended it for years, which did not review its own invoices and which has been on the list of high-risk federal contract managers since 1990. The weight of that criticism falls on the client, not on the builder. What failed was a structure in which the measurable thing and the meaningful thing came apart. Costs were measurable. Milestones were measurable. Fee was measurable against milestones. Whether tank waste was leaving a tank was, for 23 years, not on that list at all. Since the end of 2016, the fee has been tied to objective, verifiable criteria, including demonstrated technical solutions. In the two most recent annual evaluations, the contractor earned about 92 and about 95% of the available fee, up from about 83% for 2022, and the plant now runs. The lesson is not that someone stole something. It is older and less satisfying than that. When you cannot yet build the thing, you will still find yourself able to build the paperwork around it. And the paperwork will keep its promises long after the thing has stopped keeping any.